Somebody brought a guitar.
Can I have your attention, please? Welcome to our meeting of the East Chapel Hill Rotary Club. We'd like to take a few seconds for each of us in our place to for thankfulness for our club and for the food today. Thank you. Do we have guests today? If you would stand up and introduce your guest. Right?
That's my wife, Moira, with me.
Hey, Paul.
Sherry.
Info we can't hear, I'm sorry.
Jerry is here with my mother-in-law and with my mother-in-law Sandra Vincent.
Back for the second time, Heather Holbrook from Fifth Third Bank.
Okay. Bob?
I'm here with Aaron Shaw, and we're in second visit here.
Any other guests? Visiting Rotarians? Mark has been on most all of our demolition trips, and so he's an honorary member of our club. We still make him pay, but we'll pass the time basket around. Be generous with your contributions. How many people followed the Alec Murdoch trial? Great. How many people saw the final closing arguments by John Meadow? Did anybody see that? If you haven't seen it, go online and look at it. It is a fabulous thing. During the course of that, he mentioned a book that his father had given him when he was young called Your Greatest Power, which was really, I liked what he had to say about it, so I got a copy and read it. And there's a little section that I'd like to read today. One of the greatest problems in life is the problem of personality. Here again, the greatest power man possesses, the power to choose. Stop to think about it. You can choose to be friendly, or you can choose to be unfriendly. You can choose to be helpful, or you can choose to refuse to help. You can choose to be cooperative, or you can choose to be stubborn. You can choose to get excited, or you can choose to be unresponsive. You can choose to lose your temper, or you can choose to overlook the matter which would ordinarily cause you to be upset. You can choose to be lovable, or you can choose to be bitter. You can choose to smile, or you can choose to walk around with a long face. You can choose to be trusting, or you can choose to distrust everyone you meet. You can choose to believe that everybody is against you, or you can choose to believe that everybody likes you. You can choose to be lazy, or you can choose to be ambitious. Stop to think about it. If it is your greatest power, the power to choose, how you act and react, how you interpret inputs, it's up to us. And one of the things that John Meadows said at the end, of his summary was that the jury had the ability to choose, and they could choose to convict this guy over here, who most of you would probably agree is the most scurrilous human being that has ever been around. But it was really interesting to see you listen to his summary of the facts. He pulled it all together and obviously did a good job of that, because within 3 hours they had convicted Alec Murdoch of his murder. One of the great things about Rotary Club is that you get to know a lot of great people. If you ever have an issue or a problem, there's somebody in the club probably that can help you with it. Last week, most of you know that Celeste LeHue is our chief of police, and she's a member of our club. they keep her so busy, she doesn't make a lot of our meetings, but, she's great. But anyway, my wife and I woke up, in the middle of the night, we heard somebody in our garden shed out back. And in my garden shed is one of my favorite possessions, my backpack blower. If you don't have a backpack blower, you need to get one. And you can do what I did to it. I had a riding lawnmower, and I took the engine out of the riding lawnmower and put it on the backpack.
No,
And man, it'll clear out the neighborhood. Cats, dogs, leaves, whatever. But anyway, we heard this noise. So I called Celise, I probably shouldn't say this, but her cell phone number is in our directory. So I called Celise, and she said, "Bob, I'd like to help you, but we don't have anybody available." And I said, "Oh, okay." So I thought about it a minute, and I thought about the thing. Don't mess with seniors. Seniors could be trouble. So I called down to the police station. I said, "I'd just like to report an incident at my house, my garden shed outside. A couple of guys were in there taking my stuff, which I don't like. And so I shot them, both of them. And my dogs are now eating them." Well, guess what happened? 3 police cars, 2 ambulances, 2 fire trucks, and even a helicopter showed up. And Celise. And so Celise said, "I thought you said you had shot these guys." And I said, "Celise, I thought you said you didn't have anybody available." President Omar.
But it was good. It wasn't true, but it was good.
Thank you, Bob. Great imagination. Tough night for the Tar Heels last night. Don't need to bring up bad news, but we'll have another season next year. I just got back from New York. I was watching the game up there, visiting my daughter with my son and wife. Flew back in to be with y'all here today. We have a great meeting ahead of us today. We have some inductions. Before we get to the inductions, a few reminders and a few announcements. We have I know y'all are probably getting sick of hearing about it and seeing all the emails, but we have the Rotary 5K. It's really the Teacher Supply Store, the School Foundation 5K that benefits the Teacher Supply Store. So probably got one more email that'll go out. We have raised approximately $12,500 towards our $25,000 goal, which is still amazing. We still have another week left. If you get a chance, please forward the email that I sent out today to any friends or family members, anyone who you think is interested in buying a raffle ticket. You do have a chance to win $1,500, $1,000, or $500. That is not tax deductible. Your raffle ticket purchase is not tax deductible. Later in the year, we'll have the availability for people to make direct contributions to the Teacher Supply Store. If that's what you decide to do, that'll be in July and August. We have soon-to-be inducted member Sandra Henson, who has a flag that I've been told that she would like to present. Do you have a flag that you brought with us to show us today, Sandra? I've been briefly told the story about this. This is from the Rotary Club St. Claude of France. And you had a exchange student, right, that stayed with you. Was this recently or a while ago? 4 years ago. All right, there you go. We got an antique right there, people. Beautiful. Thank you for sharing that with us. I'm going on eBay and I'm going to list this thing in a minute. Make us some money for our 5K Teacher Supply Store. We're going to go ahead and commence with the inductions. Linda and Gavin. All right. Thanks, bud.
Good afternoon. Nice to see everybody. Well, fellow Rotarian, I'll tell you what, let's start by doing this. Why don't we go ahead and invite our inductees with their sponsors to come on up front here, if you don't mind. Fantastic. Oh, man. Welcome. You're welcome. Well, fellow Rotarians, it's the duty of our Rotary Club to add new members from time to time so that we may not only increase our usefulness and influence as a club, but also to extend the spirit of Rotary throughout our community and indeed our world. Today, we welcome to our ranks and admit to membership Sandra Henson and Alex Nicodem. Rotary is an international organization of business and professional people with more than 33,000 Rotary clubs in over 200 countries. Sandra and Alex, I wish to impress upon you that you've been admitted not only to the Rotary Club of East Chapel Hill, but to a worldwide association of over 1.3 million like-minded business and professional leaders. With the pin you are about to receive, you're entitled to travel throughout the world, find a Rotary Club within easy distance, and be warmly welcomed by fellow Rotarians. Even though the language may be different, the food unusual, and the location far from home. Sandra and Alex, the honor and privilege of Rotary membership also carries with it duties and obligations. You will be expected to attend our club's meetings regularly, to enthusiastically perform your share of club service within our teacher supply store, youth services, monthly family house dinners, bike nights, dental missions, and other service causes, to actively participate in our fellowship activities like our holiday parties, Valentine's lunch, steak nights, pop-up events, and to place your knowledge and talents at the disposal of the club. Always remember Rotary's motto, service above self. Our goal in Rotary is to encourage and foster the development of fellowship as an opportunity for service, high ethical standards in business and professions, dignifying each Rotarian with an opportunity to serve our society, the advancement of international understanding, goodwill, and peace through a world of people united in the ideal of service and fellowship. Rotary challenges you to live by the Rotary four-way test in all that you say and do. That test asks, first, is it the truth? Is it fair to all concerned? Will it build goodwill and better friendships? And will it be beneficial to all concerned? Sandra and Alex, do you accept this challenge and commitment? Well, then I please ask all of our members to rise. Sandra and Alex, in the name of Rotary Club of East Chapel Hill, it's our honor to and privilege to formally admit you to membership into our club, and we would like to ask your sponsors, Mike Roach and Jennifer Player, to affix your emblem pin to your lapel. Perfect, we've got those. Perfect, you're all ahead of the game, Mike, well done. Let me be the first to welcome you both to membership in the club. We're honored to have you, and one of your first roles as a Rotarian of East Chapel Hill will be to give a brief introduction of yourself, and we will start with Mrs. Henson. So welcome. You all may be seated. Thank you.
I was introduced to Rotary in Kinston, North Carolina by my husband, Don, who was very active in the chapter at that time. And I visited often as a guest and was asked to be a guest speaker for one of the Friday meetings. I'm also a Paul Harris Fellow. Our family hosted a Rotary exchange student, and my family still stays in touch with the family. And Don and I visited his family in France on a trip to France and Switzerland, because he lives about 45 minutes from Switzerland. Edward, his name was Edward Delos, and his father was a Rotarian. We moved to Chapel Hill in 1995 when my husband retired from dentistry, and because he wanted to come up here because he went to Carolina and he had many friends here, and since he retired, he wanted to be able to reconnect with them. And he played, when he was at Carolina, he played on the 41 UNC basketball team, and then he joined the Navy and returned to play on the varsity team in 46. Since moving here, I've been active in the North Carolina Symphony as a trustee, UNC Board of Visitors, Moorhead Planetarium Board, Christ United Methodist Church Council and Trustees, and many other women's organizations such as Colonial Dames, DAR, and Daughters of Cincinnati. I'm interested in joining East Chapel Hill Rotary Club after enjoying some special programs here, and thank you for inviting me to join.
Sandra has a job.
Hello, everyone. That's the name. Okay. Apparently it was, sorry, yes?
Sandra is a furry. Said that right, Sandra? She shoes horses.
Not anymore.
We don't have anybody else in the job.
Thank you. Cliff.
Well, it was supposedly my 35th birthday on Monday, but then my wife informed me that it was actually my 36th birthday. So I just lost a year and didn't even realize it. So I'm Alex Nicodem. I am a residential realtor here in town that I've been doing that for the past 5 years and look forward to doing it for forever. I'm a former fundraiser for the Habitat for Humanity Restore. My wife and I moved here, I guess 10 years ago for her to go to UNC Law, and she is now a professor of human services law at the School of Government. We have a 5-year-old son who's obsessed with penguins and trains. So if anyone has a pet penguin, or if anyone's a conductor, please let me know, because I would love to connect you to on those topics. And then lastly, I look forward to becoming not just a member of Rotary, but a Rotarian. I think there might be a difference between those two things. And I thank you to Jennifer for inviting me and for all the warm and friendly faces and conversations over the past, I think, 4 meetings that I've been here. So it's great. Look forward to meeting you all, and hope you all have a great weekend.
Jeff, that might be about to start.
We have Bob Slater as a train conductor. Where's Bob?
This week's over there, just before you.
Over there. That's Alex. That's the man you want to take your son to go see right over there.
Where is he?
Stand up there, Bob. You see him?
All right, you have a pet penguin, right?
No, that's Cliff. And his penguin is furrier than your penguin. We have an announcement. Tim, do we have any other announcements before we pass it off to Tim Smith? We have some Paul Harris fellows we're going to announce. Anyone else that has an announcement? Yes, Bill.
You know, you've done this about every month, but this month a number of us got birthdays.
True.
Cliff's birthday's tomorrow, mine was yesterday. Ryan Keelan, we have any other March birthdays?
Do we have any other? All the March birthdays, stand up, please. Thank you, Bill. Big round of applause. Happy birthday. Thank you for reminding me, Bill.
Omar.
Yes, Linda.
So one other item, those of you who might be aware, we have a new hometown hero for the East Chapel Hill Rotary Club. Liz Hankey was recognized as a hometown hero for the town of Chapel Hill this past week for her superb leadership and commitment to solar. So please join me in congratulating her.
Thank you, Linda. Great job, Liz. Thank you for reminding us. Tim.
Thank you, Omar. Yes, we just like to briefly recognize those folks who have recently become Paul Harris Fellows, and that is a $1,000 contribution to Rotary International. I will go through the folks who are not here first. But Jody Magnus has become Paul Harris Fellow, excuse me, for the first time. Edward Holmes has also become one for the first time. Bobby Gonzalez has become one for the first time. Tim Dalton has now become a two-time Paul Harris Fellow. Rob Goss is also a two-timer. And Jerry Benson is a three-timer. So please give them a round of applause. For our first-timers who are here, we have Clay Harrell. But please stay seated because your stuff has not come in yet. But we would like to recognize you. Jim Robles, please come up and get your badge and certificate, please. Cliff Butler is here, I know, and he has become a three-time Paul Harris Fellow. So please come get yours. Pat Phelan is here, and he is also a three-time. And finally, Bob Woodruff. This is his fourth time being a Paul Harris Fellow. So please come up and get your Thank you, President Omar.
Thank you, Tim. Thank you guys so much. We're going to pass it off to Brian Keeler to introduce our speaker. Yeah, that's you, isn't it?
We did have something here. We did have a bit of an introduction for you here. You're going to play it.
Oh, no.
Well,
skip it.
This is good, guys. I don't think you want it. I think you'll approve of what's happening here. When you hear it, I think he had to edit a little bit of the program here, but I don't think you're going to edit this if Jeff can find it. Anyway, what we've got here is you ready? We've got some of the music that Kaiser has performed in the past. So I'm not sure you realize today, and I think this is the very first time that this club has had a heavy metal rock star talking to us here and giving a presentation. But this is one of his many other, are we getting this play? We're not doing that quite late yet. Well, maybe when we finish, how about that? Yeah, we'll do it at the end. Anyway, but I'd like to give a little postscript before we start, if I might, before I introduce you, Kaiser, because we left a few things, one thing, a little hanging last time from our last speaker, because our president gave a riveting introduction to Eric Montrose, if you remember, but he did leave one little point out there hanging, because he did not declare who the winner was of that pickup game that he had had with Eric at the Dean Dome. And so I did a little research, and I have an irrefutable source that has given me the result of what that game is. Now this is going to surprise you all, I think, because it seems that our president exercised, very surprisingly and impressively, an incredible amount of civility, sensitivity, civility again, and modesty, because he didn't want to embarrass our speaker, because it seems that he and his little brother Adam had defeated the mighty Montrose and his equally lofty opponent. So if you've ever doubted our president, you have to be recognized that he has extraordinary powers and abilities that you might not have appreciated. So, Omar, congratulations on that victory. And it seems the Tar Heels could have done with you last night, with your help there. But anyway, now we come to my friend here, Kaiser. And if you read what's written about him, you'll think that this couldn't quite be real, because it looks as if there have been 3 lives written about him, all the different things that he's done over the years. But it is all there, and there's even much more that's written in here. So today, we're not sure whether he's going to talk about heavy metal rock. I've heard him sing and play guitar, and he does that beautifully. He does percussion. He's an extraordinary marksman with the old-fashioned bow and arrow. So, Kaiser, what you're going to choose to talk on, I don't know, but here we are. Yeah. See what you can do.
Thank you so much. You know, listening just now to what Bob was saying about the choices that we have to make in life, I'm reminded of something that my father used to tell me, and maybe we can add that one on there. He said that in life, one is almost never presented with grand moral choices between good and evil, but every moment of every day, we're confronted with situations in which we can either choose to be petty or magnanimous and generous. And if you choose to be generous and magnanimous, you will be a good person, and those moral choices will clarify themselves for you in all instances. And so those are words that I've really lived by. And I really, I found that quite inspiring. I found that during the induction ceremony, the 4 questions, the litmus tests that you should put to yourself before speaking or before doing anything, those were really excellent. I don't know much about the Rotarians, but if this is the essence of what they are about, I really laud your organization. It's fantastic. And I want to thank you all deeply for having me here today. And thank you especially, Brian, for having me up here. I am not going to talk about archery or heavy metal music or anything like that. I'm going to talk about something that's been very much on my mind, which is, of course, the relationship between the United States and China. This is what I do in my job all the time. This is what I focus on. I'm often asked whether we are at present already in a Cold War, and I'm reminded of one of these, intolerably long Zoom sessions that we all had to do during the lockdown. So this was maybe in 2019. A lot of us were 2020 days. We're on a call, and a person I really admire, Robert Daly from the Kissinger Institute, had a great definition of what constitutes an actual Cold War. He said a Cold War between 2 countries exists when, for each country, the organizing principle of life becomes hostility, antagonism toward the other. And I thought to myself, we are not there yet. That's not where we are in either the United States or with China. But since then, it feels very much like hostility, or at least contestation with China is fast becoming the one organizing principle in this country, at least. It's the way that we sell every major piece of legislation. Think of the Chips and Science Act or the Inflation Reduction Act or any of the many infrastructure initiatives that proceeded with these things. Infrastructure, investment in domestic semiconductor production, revitalizing manufacturing. It's all sold now in terms of competition or contestation with China. We are now in a very precarious moment in our relationship. Still, I think, our most consequential bilateral relationship, and one that is in deep, deep trouble. We need to be very, very candid about this. I realize that as an American Chinese person, somebody of Chinese descent who has spent more than half of my adult life in China, I have maybe more at stake here than the rest of the people here in this room. But I think you should all realize, and hopefully before it's not too late, that the consequences of an actual conflagration with China are horrifying. And it's something that I have never felt in my life more possible than right now. And that's so deeply frightening. It would be catastrophic for not just the United States and China and for other places that may be caught in the middle. I'm thinking obviously Taiwan, but it would be catastrophic for the world. When we seem to converge, as the House Select Committee seemed to in its first hearing on Tuesday night of last week, around this language of China's ruling party as an existential threat to the US, either we are using very irresponsible hyperbole, or we really do think that either they die or we die. That is what existential really means. In either case, my reaction in watching to how we have responded in recent months and years to China, I'm thinking of balloon gates and of course this select committee, the emotion that I feel isn't sadness or anger so much as embarrassment. It's truly embarrassing to me as an American to watch our country behave like this. We're not behaving like the confident superpower that we ought to be. One that upholds and believes that upholding our values and our institutions at home, our openness, our tolerance, our diversity, our rule of law, our democracy, that upholding those, we will prevail. We don't need to talk about existential threats. We don't need to worry about the rents under our bed and infiltration by that sinister United Front work department in our everyday lives. No. If we re-embrace our values, we will prevail. And I'm sure that we will continue to be able to attract the best and the brightest talent from all over the world, that we will continue to be able to motivate. And yet, we are talking about China as though they are some sort of 10-foot tall juggernaut, an omnipotent force that's just got us trembling in fear. That is embarrassing. We're lashing out with this inchoate kind of paroxysm that's just unbecoming and dangerous to our future, our way of life. It's not taking the high road. I don't think that most Americans really have a keenly felt sense of the extent to which the two world's biggest economies are intertwined, or the shock that would come from a genuine, across the board, quote unquote, decoupling. Few seem aware of the hit to the quality of life that we would genuinely take. We've grown accustomed to this way of life that depends on access to Chinese markets, the manufacture of Chinese goods, to the exchange to cooperation on all sorts of fronts. We fret about global warming. We should be all fretting about global warming, but there is very little appreciation for just how carbon intensive the activity of arms racing genuinely is. I mean, let alone what an actual kinetic war would be in terms of its impact on the environment. I shudder to think what life will be like in this country for people who look like me, for people who look like my family, who are already experiencing quite horrific levels of hate, whether in speech or in the form of actual violence. We all know about that this is happening. The Americans don't have a great track record. We gunned down turbaned Sikhs who are not Muslims, both after 9/11 and after what happened in San Bernardino. This is really a shameful thing. Recent events have me really worried about our ability as a country to think seriously and to craft responsible, effective policy when it comes to China. It's hard for me to imagine that any dispassionate American observer could look at how we've responded and not feel like balloon gates, this hysterics, the moral panic we're experiencing right now isn't at some level quite embarrassing. It's not the dignity, the poise, the equanimity of a real superpower. The way China has become a means of just scoring domestic political points, or we don't know how to actually shape a response to China, and this is really worrying to me. There's a line that I really like from President Obama's Oslo speech when he was given, admittedly very prematurely, the Nobel Peace Prize. He said in it, I'm going to do my best Obama here, well, I know that engagement with repressive regimes lacks the satisfying purity of indignation. The years since his presidency ended have seen us abandon the idea of engagement with that repressive regime altogether. Few people are willing to come to the defense of the policy of engagement. And somehow both Democrats and Republicans have converged on this idea that it was a failure. And maybe time permitting today, I can talk about why I think that is simply wrong. But today, on our political left, we have people regularly bathing, luxuriating in that, what Obama called the satisfying purity of indignation over human rights, the very real abuses in Xinjiang or in Hong Kong, over the Chinese surveillance state, over censorship, the quashing of dissidents, and without enough thought really given to how we can actually address those very real abuses. What I've come to think of as, well, gosh, I mean, on the right, it's also pretty bad. Let's face it. We get a lot of chest thumping, a lot of jingoistic bluster. This is something I call Taiwan tumescence. I'm sorry if that is not a very polite piece of language, but as well as this sort of cynical weaponization of the whole human rights issue. And this only really galvanizes Beijing. The Chinese leadership doesn't believe any more than I do that the very same people responsible for the Muslim ban are suddenly ardent defenders of the rights of oppressed Muslims in China. They don't believe that any more than I do. We're in a place right now where one side, let's call them the China hawks by way of shorthand, have a nice, succinct, straightforward argument to make. It's one that is flattering to Americans, that makes us feel good about our moral rectitude as a country, that seems very principled, that seems very clear-eyed and tough. We love tough. What's more, their arguments in China accord with the facts, as most people, in the US seem to have come to accept those facts, whether they watch conservative or liberal cable, whether they listen to AM talk radio or to NPR. Meanwhile, ask somebody from the other side to present their case, somebody like me, people who are members of Camp Reasonable, and we treat you to a couple of hours of lecture on China's history, on all its nuance. We pull out a palette with 58 different shades of gray and we want to paint really subtly. It's complicated. This is not persuasive, right? Nobody wants to hear this. It's no mystery to me why one side seems to be winning the debate. So many times in recent months, I've been in rooms full of academics, or diplomats, think tankers, serious analysts who have skin in the game and a real sense of the stakes, people who are professional, people who study China. And if you compare their consensus on some of these big issues about what China actually wants, issues on what are the odds that China will actually make an aggressive move up against Taiwan, you compare that to the language that you hear in the Pentagon or on the Hill or among conservative pundits or the China hawks, there is a huge disconnect, and that is a problem. Unanimously, the people who really study the issue, these are people who know the language, who can read the documents, and who devoted their lives to the study of China, the serious people. And I'm talking about former CIA directors of national intelligence or the China desk chief. I'm talking about former National Security Agency, National Security Council China directors. I'm talking about State Department, former Assistant Secretaries of State for East Asia Pacific Affairs. I'm talking about very serious people. Their views are diametrically opposed to what this so-called bipartisan consensus is right now on the Hill. This is really worrying to me. The fact is that we are, as citizens of this democracy, faced with very important decisions about how to move forward with policy toward China. It's an issue of absolutely significant importance. And I say that irrespective of whether you are an elected official, a business leader, or a journalist, or an activist, or just somebody who likes to sound off on Twitter or on TikTok, as long as we still have TikTok. We need to develop a smart set of policies, not just what we have right now, which is just an attitude. We actually need policies. But the reality is, most of us, and very few of us, almost none of us, are going to dedicate our lives, or even much of our time really, to becoming truly informed on China. That's just not possible. It's, a gigantic historical problem. So what does that leave us? We need then to know who to take serious. We need to know who among this multitude of people who write about China, who advocate for policy positions, who are engaged in that analysis. We need to know who among these people we ought to be listening to and to be taking seriously. So how do we know who to believe? Let me first be clear that this is not an argument that says that it's only those people with PhDs in Chinese studies who have proficiency, demonstrable proficiency in the language, who have spent years and years living in China, that they're the only ones to be trusted. No, there is no political litmus test either. Quite a few of the people whose China expertise I regard very highly have worked under Republican administrations or are themselves Republicans or political conservatives. And quite a few of the folks who absolutely do not pass muster by the set of criteria that I'm about to lay out, I would propose quite a few of the people whose views I would quickly discard happen to be Democrats. So in my role as the host of the Cynical Podcast, which is a weekly discussion program on current affairs in China, day in, day out, my job really is to select guests. Not everyone who comes on my show is somebody whose main arguments I completely agree with. I mean, it's not an adversarial show. It's not hard talk. I'm not pushing these people. I see the show as an opportunity to try to draw out their best insights and everything like that. But still, I need to know who is in authority and who can be trusted and whose views are not going to be, completely lopsided. So I think I've developed a sense for that, and I wanted to try to articulate what it is, what those criteria actually are. And I want to suggest that you can all adopt these. There's only 5 of them. And if you can remember what they are, and remember when you're listening to that talking head or listening, do they exhibit the kinds of habits of mind that I'm about to lay out? Do they exhibit the kind of reflexive approaches that I want in a good China watcher? What are those criteria? I would identify 5, like I said. One is humility. A second is sensitivity to bias. A third is holism. A fourth is historical acuity. And lastly, and most importantly, cognitive empathy or strategic empathy. Okay, we can dispense with humility pretty quickly. Very simple, easy rule. When someone describes himself or herself as a China expert, you can dismiss or at least seriously discount what that person has to say. If you think about how ridiculous it would sound for somebody to claim to be an America expert, you can get the idea. Anyone who says, I'm a China expert, is full of it. Just don't understand. We have other words we like that are a little more modest. A China specialist, that's what I usually, I'm a China specialist, I'm a China scholar, I'm a China watcher, that's all fine. But China expert, no. So look for people who are candid about the limitations of what we can know. Given the nature of China's political system, it has this well-deserved reputation for opacity, right? There's simply a lot that we just can't know. It's in a black box. So when somebody cherry picks quotes from a handful of speeches or documents to make some sweeping argument with great certitude that Xi Jinping has a timetable, he's going to invade in 2027, or that China seeks to supplant the US as the global hegemon, just to take a couple of well-worn examples, you should know that it is just as easy to cherry pick statements from those very same people that demonstrate exactly the opposite. We just don't know. We aren't, unless we are Xi Jinping himself, or something very, very close to him, we don't know what's in their mind. We should have the humility to know what we do not know. I've talked about humility first because I think that it is the wellspring, I think, for the other habits of mind that we should ideally cultivate ourselves, or at least learn to recognize and expect from the specialists who we look to. Humility helps us to recognize the value in other perspectives, right? That is the most important thing. From other disciplines, so not just the economists or the sociologists or the political scientists, but and not just the national security people, but a variety of perspectives. So that really leads to holism, which is the next thing I want to talk about. From the Chinese themselves, of course, we want the Chinese perspectives on things. We need to know how what we say and what we do lands on Chinese ears, what their likely responses are. We need to be able to turn the chessboard around. So humility leads to cognitive empathy as well. And on to all of them. Humility helps us to cultivate a habit of self-interrogation for sources of bias, for confirmation bias that we all experience, these cognitive biases that we all are susceptible to. And maybe that's the next thing I want to talk about is sensitivity to bias. I think it's vitally important to understand the optical properties of the lens that we all view China through. Okay? What is that lens? In the case of almost all of us who are not themselves China specialists, we know what we think we know about China through the lens of what? The media, right? That's all we know. The media, in this case, is made up of about 200 individual people, all of whom have their own privileges and prejudices, their own perspectives on things, right? And I have a great admiration for people in the media profession. Being a reporter in China is not fun. I mean, it can be fun, but it's also, I've been one. You get surveilled, you get harassed, sometimes you get detained, sometimes you even get roughed up a little bit. It's not fun. And I admire it tremendously. Journalism in general, I mean, I think it's a good thing that Americans have this sort of adversarial conception of what journalism ought to do. We should speak truth to power. We should challenge people in authority, whether they're, people who are powerful politically or powerful because, they're plutocrats. We should. I mean, it's an old saw for journalists, like if what you're writing isn't making people in power uncomfortable, then it's just PR, right? That's great. But let's think about this. Does that travel when we start writing about another country that's a very, very different country, a country where the fairy tales you listen to when you grow up were different, a wholly different pantheon of heroes and villains in your life, a whole different set of moral precepts that you were brought up with, totally different sociological structures and religious traditions and whatnot. It's a very different place, and does this apply? Let me give you an example. So if I pick up the New York Times on any given day, and I flip through it, and I read all the stories about what's happening here in the United States, I could selectively come away with a belief that this country is going to hell in a handbasket. I read about yet another black motorist, unarmed, driving out of a car, beaten by cops, killed. Another school shooting. I mean, there's a lot of things that are, partisan gridlock and all sorts of terrible things. January 6th. I could believe that if I were to open that sliding glass door, I'd smell burning tires in the streets and hear the sound of people rushing to the barricades. But I don't believe that. I know that of a Sunday, I'm going to drive my SUV to Costco up in Durham, and I'm going to load a bunch of crap I don't really need. Then I'm going to come home and I'm going to find my son playing Fortnite so he doesn't come help unload the car, and my daughter, when she was here, was going to be listening to her BTS, and life is normal. And why do I know this? Well, because I live here, and because there's also a lot of quotidian stories in that newspaper that are going to give me ballast and make me understand that life is like that. But the 6 or 7 stories that are in a given New York Times about China are all going to be what? They're not going to be dog bites man, they'll be man bites dog. They're not going to be about the bridges that didn't collapse or the planes that landed safely. It's not going to be about that hardworking, very boring bureaucrat who actually does his job well. It's going to be about the corrupt guy who's, just a flagrant violator of people's, constitutional rights. It's going to be about the oppression of minorities. And these are all accurate stories. These are all true. The reporting is quite accurate, but accurate doesn't get you all the way to realistic, right? I have a friend who grew up in China and then writes for the New Yorker. Her name is Jiayang Fan. And at a conference once, she was asked what it feels like as a person of Chinese origin to read English language reporting, American reporting on China. She said something brilliant. She said, it's like looking at a familiar part of my own body through an X-ray. It's anatomically precise. It's penetrating in a very literal sense, right? But she doesn't feel like that is the hand or the foot that I know, right? Because it is missing the flesh, the muscle, the corpuscles, the ligament, the connective tissue, and all that stuff that makes it hers, right? It's just bones. And I feel the same way. I can totally resonate with her on that. So look, it's a structural problem. We're not going to suddenly make all the journalists start writing really kind of everyday stories about ordinary people, human interest stories alone. No, that's ridiculous. That's not to be expected. But what can we do? We can account for that. We can think about the optical properties of that lens through which we're viewing China and adjust accordingly. If I'm spearfishing, I see a fat salmon swimming or a trout in a stream, if I think that the water isn't, the diffraction doesn't matter, and I aim right at what I think I'm looking at, I'll miss. But if I understand the optical properties of light and that surface of water, and then make the adjustment, I'll spear the fish. I'll eat well. So do that. Think about those optical properties. I mean, I could devote a whole lot more time talking about this particular issue. There is going to be bias in the reporting that we read. That doesn't mean that there is some coordinated campaign to smear China. We're talking about, again, a relatively small number of individuals with an outsized ability to shape our views on this massive nation of 1.4 billion people. Together they form this lens. They are working hard and they're trying their damnedest to do a good job. But it's on us to understand. Move on to the next thing, holism. What do I mean by holism? It's an approach to look for, I think, look, right now, there's a pernicious tendency to pick up a single lens when we look at China. What is that lens always? It's the lens of national security. Everything somehow gets lensed through national security. It's inarguably one of the important ones to look at, but if you are only looking at it through one lens, you are that blind man who's touching only one piece of the elephant. You're only describing the trunk. We need to touch more parts of the elephant, and we need those blind men to talk to each other. We need, when we are writing about that elephant, or thinking about the elephant, or making our decisions about how to respond to the elephant, we need to know about the leg, and the tusk, and the trunk, and the side, and the ear, and the whole deal, right? We need the holistic 360-degree thing. There's a great expression I like, dragonfly eyes. I think we need dragonfly eyes. We need the ability to integrate a whole bunch of different complexity. We can't maybe do that, but we should look for that habit of mind in the experts to whom we pay any attention. Look for those dragonfly eyes. Look for that reflexive tendency to pick up multiple lenses when looking at China. When I enjoin you to look for historical acuity, I think maybe you're imagining that what I mean is that you should know the whole damn history of China and everything. Actually, I think the salient parts of understanding Chinese history are not that hard. I could do an hour of a lecture on modern Chinese history, and I think you would get the basics of it. You would understand the main furnishings in the Chinese mind that really affected the way they look out at the world. So, these are historical things, right? So that's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about with historical acuity is our history. That is the history of the West, of Europe, and the colonial offshoots like the United States, right? The thing to beware of is the tendency toward teleological thinking, the belief that history has a specific goal or an orientation. This is the pernicious thing, and it's there in our language when we talk about the moral arc of history is long, but it bends toward justice. You know, that's a wonderful phrase, but that's not really the truth. Or when we say, you know, they're behind the curve of history, that all that's implicit in this is this belief that history has a specific direction. We all really went for this idea after the end of the Cold War, when we suffered this grand historical amnesia, when we suddenly forgot how contingent history is. To look for this quality in people, look for this quality where they understand that they don't adopt this Whiggish teleological view of history that says that it inevitably converges on liberal democratic capitalism. I happen to love liberal democratic capitalism, and I see it, but a lot of my compatriots sit here on one side of an historical ravine, looking across this chasm at these countries on the other side, at China, of course, at Iran, at Russia, at India, at Indonesia, and they say, come on over. Just come on over. It's great on this side. Like I said, you know, I got an SUV, and we got Costco, we got great premium cable. Just come on over. So if we bothered to look downward into that ravine, we would realize that it's filled with bodies. And we pass through all sorts of narrow defiles, so many skin of the teeth escapes, so many lucky throws of the dice or flips of the coin that we had to go just such a way in order for us to enjoy all that we have today. And this is not something that every country can simply immediately do. One of the worst things that we ever did was, after the collapse of the Cold War, was just adopt this sort of be like us attitude. We forgot how important the contingency of history is.
Kaiser, just time awareness. We have about 6 minutes left.
Great. I will wrap up with
any questions or whatever. I just want to let you know where we are.
Okay, thanks. So, you know, if we come to this fifth, and I think the most important, which is cognitive empathy, really. Empathy is something that we're pretty much all born with, unless we're, you know, psychopaths, right? But I trust that nobody here is a psychopath and won't be offended at my assuming neurotypical behavior, but we all have empathy, right? And, you know, I'm not talking about normal emotional empathy, though. I'm talking about that harder kind of informed empathy, cognitive empathy, the one that requires us to actually know something about your lived experience, to actually know something about the values and institutions and historical experiences of that other person to whom we hope to extend empathy. Empathy is very different from sympathy. Empathy does not require us to abdicate our own values when we try to step into the other person's shoes. We just hang them up on the coat rack. We step in behind the other person's eyes. We come out. We put our values back on. Right? It's pretty simple, but we don't exercise enough. We don't spend enough time trying to turn that chessboard around and think about how it looks like from the other side. We don't think about how our rhetoric and our behavior lands and whether what we're doing will actually be effective. Instead, we either wallow in that satisfied purity of indignation, or we chest thump and shout jingoistic slogans. So this is the chief quality that you really need to look for in an analyst, in a pundit, even a policymaker. People for whom China isn't some distant abstraction, but a flesh and blood reality with rich and complex emotional life of its own. People with this capacity also tend to have a real appreciation for the stakes. They have skin in the game. I mean, they don't casually speak of policies that gamble with thousands, millions of lives. Happily, there are quite a number of people who work in China, who work on China rather, who are publishing in Foreign Affairs, or in the Financial Times, or in the Washington Post and the Wall Street Journal, who really do embody these qualities. They have the humility, they have the awareness of bias, they have the dragonfly eyes, they have that holistic approach, they have a sophisticated understanding of history, and they have this fundamental cognitive empathy. I urge you to make this your checklist, to look for evidence of these qualities before you subscribe to that Substack, or before you decide to follow that jerk on Twitter, or listen to that speaker who comes to speak to the Rotary. But please, I mean, I think these are the habits of mind to look for. So, and of course, before you vote for that politician. So thank you very much. I would be very happy to take some questions. This gentleman has his hand up first.
Could we ask you to come back? because you're very eloquent, you're articulate, you're poetic. It must be the rock. But I think that we can't take the time today to ask you the kind of questions and have you articulate them for us to really see and feel what this audience has, who are very intelligent, no experts in here, but a lot of specialists. But I just make a plea, Mr. President, to have Kaiser come back.
Well, thank you. I absolutely, I'd be more than honored to come back. I would be more than honored. Yeah, so.
So, it's gonna be a tough question, I'm sure. Ignoring the if, or if not, if at some point in the next 5 years China were to go in Taiwan, what would you like to see the U.S. do as a reaction to that, and why?
Yeah, that's a really tough one. I mean, hopefully it won't come to that. And I really am an advocate of simply trying to restore the status quo and to kick the can down the road, because this is an unresolvable question right now. I think that anyone who can look at Taiwan, the vibrancy of its democracy, the openness of its society, and not find a lot that is admirable in it and want to defend it, doesn't have a heart. But anyone who looks at the diplomatic commitments that we made that were absolutely foundational to bringing China into the proper family relations, to defang China, stop it from a revolutionary exports, the successes that flowed from the Nixon-Kissinger opening. If you think that we can just simply throw those commitments away, you don't have a head. So we're caught in a real conundrum. If it did come to that, I think we need to come to Taiwan's defense. I think that the only people who are not sure whether we will or not are Americans. China absolutely believes that the United States will make a robust, and Japan and Australia will participate in that. All of their contingencies plan on that. So strategic ambiguity as the policy that we pursued, it has nothing to do with China. It's actually aimed at Taiwan. Strategic ambiguity, this idea that, well, we can't be sure that we're going to come to Taiwan's assistance, that is for Taiwan to hear, so that they don't do anything that will kick the status quo too far off kilter down. What would happen if look, there are a lot of things that have been written about it. It would be a Pyrrhic victory at best for China, but it would be probably a quote-unquote victory. We would see the worst recession or depression, absolutely, because we would suddenly lose all of our ability to have access to high-end semiconductors, which are the backbone of modern technological society. We would be in a terrible, terrible way. That's what would happen.
Thank you, Kaiser, very much for your time. We have a gift for you, Kaiser. One of our members' charities, Rita's Gift, crafts made by African children, the Tar Heels, yes. The benefit education children. Thank you very much. I did want to mention, we do have some sociopaths in here as well. Don't kid yourself. Everyone have a great weekend.
Good job.